The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the parched land, where dirt and dust merged into a hazy horizon. A lone rider emerged, silhouetted against the blood-orange backdrop of the setting sun, his silhouette outlined by the rolling hills of dry grass and cracked earth. The sound of hooves kicked up a cloud of fine dust that danced in the evening light, swirling around the rider like ethereal spirits trying to reclaim the forgotten land. As he rode closer to the ranch, the rider noted the weathered wooden fence that lined the property, each post leaning like an old man weary from struggle. The ranch house stood defiantly against the elements, its once white paint peeling and faded, now a dull gray, with the roof sagging under the weight of years and memories. Was this the last outpost of a dream, or merely a relic of abandonment? The loneliness of the ranch seeped into the very ground, every creak of the house and rustle of the wind whispering tales of sorrow and resilience. Inside, the widow rancher moved through her home with the grace of someone who had learned to accept solitude like an old friend. Her hands, calloused from years of labor, brushed against the rough-hewn furniture as she prepared for yet another evening alone. She set a kettle on the stove, the fire crackling to life, sending warmth into the air, fighting the chill that crept in with the fading light. Outside, the rider dismounted, his boots sinking slightly into the dust, the weight of his own burdens pressing down on his shoulders. He hesitated, shifting his gaze from the house to the expanse of land that surrounded him. Endless and unforgiving, yet strangely beautiful in its desolation. What stories did the wind carry from the distant mountains? Did it speak of sorrow or hope? Or was it merely a reminder of the relentless passage of time? As he stepped closer to the door, the reality of his journey felt heavier. He could turn away, retreat back into the untamed wilderness, or knock and cross the threshold into a world woven with grief and necessity. With the last rays of sunlight slipping behind the hills, the decision loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon. In that moment, a single thought flickered in his mind. Could a meeting born of despair lead to something new? Or would it only deepen the solitude that clung to both their souls? The sun hung low over the sprawling expanse of the ranch, casting long shadows across the fields that had once thrived under the care of a steady hand. It was here, in this vast emptiness, that Clara had built a life with Samuel, a life filled with the laughter of children and the warmth of shared dreams. Now the ranch stood still, its silence a heavy blanket suffocating the remnants of joy that had once pulsed through its heart. Clara stood on the porch, her hands resting on the splintered railing, the rough wood biting into her palms as if to remind her of the very fragility of what remained. The air was thick with the scent of dust and dying grass, a sharp contrast to the sweet aroma of fresh bread that would have wafted through the open windows during the midday meal. She could almost hear Samuel's voice, deep and soothing, calling out to her from the barn, where they had shared countless moments of labor and love. How many times had they stood side by side, mending fences, planting seeds, healing animals, their laughter mingling with the sounds of nature. Did he ever think it would come to this? A crow cawed from the nearby oak, breaking the spell of her memories, and Clara's gaze drifted across the barnyard, where the horses stood listlessly, their spirits as weary as her own. She had hoped to see the vibrant life returning to the land after last year's drought, but the earth was reluctant, just as she was to move forward. Survival was a hard teacher, demanding both resilience and sacrifice. Yet she felt the weight of every choice bearing down on her. The stone-lined grave behind the barn, the last resting place of her husband, was a constant reminder of loss. The Viking settlers had buried their dead with their weapons, believing they would need them in the next life. Clara felt as if she had buried her heart alongside Samuel, leaving her armed only with memories of what used to be. A gust of wind whispered through the porch, rustling the grass and sending a chill down her spine. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, wishing for the warmth of Samuel's embrace. a gesture that now felt impossibly distant. How does a woman carry on when the very ground beneath her feet feels cursed? The horizon glowed orange with the setting sun, the colors bleeding together like the splotches of grief that painted her heart. She closed her eyes, trying to summon the strength she once had, but it slipped away like the fleeting light of day. The shadows deepened, and with it, an unsettling question loomed in her mind. Would she, like the land, ever find the strength to bloom again? As darkness settled over the ranch, she turned her back on the specters of the past, each step heavy with doubt and uncertainty. Was this truly her fate? The sound of a distant howl echoed through the night, leaving her to ponder if the empty barn would ever again harbor the warmth of home, or if it would remain a hollow shell bearing witness to her sorrow. Dust swirled in the hot air, dancing like restless spirits as the sun bore down mercilessly on the barren landscape. The horizon shimmered, a mirage of hope in a world that offered none. 6 children stumbled through the parched desert, their faces smeared with dirt, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. As they moved, their bare feet cracked on the sun-baked earth, each step a reminder of the wasteland surrounding them. Ahead, a jagged ridge loomed, casting a long shadow, but it felt like a distant dream. Hunger gnawed at their insides, a constant reminder that they were alone. Had they not seen their home burn, felt the heat of embers licking against their skin as they fled? The village had been a vibrant tapestry of laughter and life until the raiders had come, leaving nothing but ash. With every passing moment, the sun climbed higher, relentless and indifferent, as if it demanded an answer to an unasked question. How long could they survive on hope alone? The eldest, a girl of 13 named Clara, clutched her younger brother's hand tightly. She often felt the weight of leadership pressing down on her frail shoulders, as if a heavy yoke had been thrust upon her. Did she even have the strength to bear it? With each glance back at the ragged band trailing behind her, the doubt settled in like a stone in her gut. They were not merely children anymore. They were survivors, thrust into a world that had stripped them of innocence. The youngest, a boy of barely 5 summers, whimpered softly, his lips cracked, parched like the ground beneath their feet. Clara scanned the horizon desperately, searching for anything that might suggest salvation. Cacti dotted the landscape, their green spines a teasing promise of water. But they could not eat thorns. In the distance, a flock of crows circled overhead, their cries echoing against the silence. Were they heralds of death? Or were they guiding the children toward the last remnants of life? With a deep breath, Clara pressed on, the dry wind biting at her throat like a fierce Viking blade. She had often heard stories of raiders who came to take what was not theirs. Yet here they were, the children of the land, left to fend for themselves, with nothing but the desert and their shared grief as company. The further they walked, the more the sun dipped into darkness, a reminder that even the day had to end. The ground beneath them sank slightly, revealing the entrance to a hidden canyon, a sliver of shadow in the vast expanse. Hope flickered in Clara's chest, but as they approached, dread settled heavily on her shoulders. Would the canyon offer safety, or would it swallow them whole? As the first child stepped into the coolness of the canyon, a shiver ran through the group. They had survived the blaze, but could they survive the darkness ahead? As twilight bled into night, the horizon swallowed the last remnants of daylight, leaving only a canvas of deep indigo and scattered stars. The widow rancher, Margaret, stepped out of her modest cabin, the creaking floorboards echoing her solitary existence. She paused, drawing in the scent of the earth, damp from the recent rains, and listened to the whisper of the wind that rustled through the sagebrush. Her hands, weathered and calloused, cradled a wooden bowl filled with the evening's meager supper. It had been too long since she'd felt the warmth of another's company. The silence of her land stretched before her, a vast expanse of solitude that wrapped around her like an old woolen blanket, heavy with memories. But tonight, something prickled at her senses, an unsettling stillness tainted by an undercurrent of urgency. A low, desperate sound tugged at her attention, a faint cry that cut through the dusk like a knife through the quiet. What sort of creature would wander so close to her fence? Margaret's heart quickened as she moved toward the source of the noise, each step heavy with trepidation. The shadows grew long, and the air thickened with the promise of a storm. As she rounded the weathered fence post, her breath caught in her throat. There, sprawled upon the earth, were 6 small figures. Children, their clothes tattered and stained, faces smeared with dirt and desperation. Had they come from the nearby town, or perhaps lost in the unforgiving desert? As the depths of her empathy flooded her heart, she felt a surge of protective instinct that had lain dormant since her husband's passing. The sight of them, small, fragile, and utterly alone, spoke more than words ever could. The realization struck Margaret like a Viking's axe splitting wood. Survival could be a battle waged in many forms, and mercy was a weapon often forged from the strongest steel. Should she turn back, retreat to her solitary life, and let the dawn discover them? Or could she reach out, summon the courage to save them from the jaws of despair? 1,000 thoughts clamored in her mind, wrestling against the weight of her own grief. Did she have the strength to shoulder the burden of another's suffering? To risk her already meager provisions for the sake of strangers? Yet, the vision of their hollow eyes, the shallow rise and fall of their chests, melted the frost of her hesitation. As she knelt beside them, feeling the chill of their skin in the fading light, the answer began to unfold. "God help me," she whispered, breathless and resolute. The children stirred at the sound of her voice, their sunken cheeks stained with tears and dirt. In that moment, Margaret understood. The choice she faced was not merely about survival anymore. It was about humanity, connection, and the bonds that could be forged in the most unlikely of places. But as she reached out, her fingers trembling, would her heart break with the weight of their grief? Or could it blossom into something unyielding? The sun began its slow dive behind the jagged outline of the mountains, casting a golden hue across the widow's ranch. The wooden beams of the barn stretched like the sun-baked bones of a long-dead beast, rusted nails gleaming in the fading light. Inside, the 6 orphans sat huddled together on the hay-strewn floor, their faces a mix of relief and terror, as if they had only just escaped the clutches of a raging storm. Their presence filled the empty space, lingering like the scent of smoke from a recent fire, both comforting and unsettling. Martha, the widow rancher, stood just outside the barn's entrance, her hands resting on the weathered doorframe, knuckles white with tension. She watched the children, barefoot and ragged, their eyes wide as they clutched threadbare blankets. She should have felt joy. Instead, she felt the weight of the past press down on her like the oppressive summer heat. What unspoken secrets had she welcomed into her home? The memories cascaded over her like the relentless waves of the ocean, crashing into her mind uninvited. The laughter of her own children, once bright and full of life, echoed faintly in the recesses of her memory. They too had been small and innocent once, with hair as golden as the sun and voices that rang like the clear chime of a Viking bell. But that golden laughter had been snuffed out, leaving only shadows to fill the void. Did she dare open her heart again, after it had been bruised and battered by loss? As the last rays of sunlight slipped away, darkness settled like a heavy blanket, twinkling stars taking their places in the vast night sky. The barn creaked like an old man recalling tales of old, and the children's whispers mingled with the rustle of hay. They shared stories of their pasts, light-hearted yet tinged with the bitterness of survival. Martha strained to listen, a part of her yearning to connect, but another part, one shrouded in fear, held her back. Would these children, with their haunted gazes and trembling hands, awaken the ghosts she had buried deep within? She raked a hand through her hair, a gesture that felt both innocuous and guilty. In that moment, she was not just the caretaker or protector, but a time-worn vessel for grief. The echoes of her former life intertwining with the innocent laughter that now filled the barn. Yet, as the night deepened, an unmistakable tension hung in the air. A fragile line between hope and despair. What secrets would be unearthed before dawn? Would she find the strength to face them, or would the darkness swallow her whole? The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty ranch yard as the widow, Clara, moved among the half-dozen orphans she had taken in. These children, with sun-kissed skin and weary eyes, had begun to fill the emptiness that had lingered in her heart since her husband's death. They gathered around the wooden table she had salvaged from the barn, their laughter ringing out like chimes in the stillness of a fading day. Clara set down a steaming pot of stew, its rich aroma mingling with the fragrant smoke of a nearby fire pit where a few stones still bore the heat of her earlier efforts to prepare a meal. "Tell me again what you did before you came here," Clara encouraged, her voice gently probing. It was a question that danced on her tongue each day, a way to bridge the widening chasm between their lives. The life of a widow rancher and the lives of children abandoned in the harsh desert. As they shared their stories, Clara learned of the children's dreams of wide-open spaces where they could run and play without fear. A world untouched by the parched cruelty of the land. But her heart tightened as she noticed subtle signs of mistrust lingering in their eyes. Little flickers of doubt that flared up whenever she would reach out, whether to help with a scraped knee or to comfort them in the night. She couldn't blame them. They had traveled through a landscape filled with danger. A terrain where betrayal often wore a familiar face. Did they see her as just another stranger in a long line of abandonment? Clara cast her gaze to the setting sun, wondering if the warmth of her heart could ever reach theirs. The children exchanged whispers, glancing her way, eyes still clouded with uncertainty. They were brave, yet fragile, like the delicate tendrils of a newly sprouted plant, unsure if they should risk growing in this new soil. As evening enveloped the ranch, the sound of a ball bouncing against the wooden fence echoed through the air, their laughter spilling over once more. Clara watched them with a sense of hope, yet a shadow of doubt crept in, reminding her that trust wasn't something easily earned. Would her kindness be enough to cultivate a bond that could weather the storms of their pasts? The first stars blinked awake in the indigo sky, and Clara took a deep breath, the chill of night creeping in alongside the flickering light of the fire. She could feel the weight of their unspoken fears pressing down like the heavy stones she used to build walls around her heart. Would they ever let her in? Or would she forever be a ghost drifting through their memories, never fully able to bridge the divide? The sun dipped low over the rugged horizon, casting long shadows that danced across the dry earth of the Widow Green's ranch. Dust clung to the air like an unspoken promise, settling over the uneven fence posts and the scattered remnants of a once bustling homestead. On the porch, Annie Green leaned against the wooden railing, her fingers tracing the grain of the weathered boards, while her heart twisted in time with the creaking wood beneath her weary weight. The 6 orphans, children of the storm-tossed, of the lost, had become her responsibility. Yet doubts loomed like the approaching thunderheads, their presence a storm of a different kind. As the sun sank lower, casting a warm golden hue across the ranch, the distant shapes of local ranchers emerged, their horses trotting stiffly, heads held high as if to challenge the encroaching dusk. They were a cluster of hardened faces, men weathered by the land, men who bore the weight of history in their gnarled hands. They had known loss, just as Annie had, but their eyes held a spark of something else. Suspicion. "What trouble are you bringing to our soil, widow?" one of them called, his voice rough as gravel, laced with the venom of whispered rumors. "Those kids," What do you think they'll do? Turn on us when night falls? Annie straightened, her heart racing. Did they not see the fear in those children's eyes? Did they not understand that among the dust and the hard truths, she was trying to build a sanctuary? What harm can they bring? She retorted, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. The wind caught her words, swirling them away like chaff in the gusts. The ranchers shifted, murmuring among themselves, their distrust palpable in the shrinking light. Old Man Caldwell, the eldest among them, stared through narrowed eyes. What do you think they'll learn from you? A woman's weakness or the strength to survive? They didn't understand the burden she carried, the silent vows she made to those lost souls who had stumbled into her life. She had taken them in, yes, but what if they had taken something from her in return? A sense of peace. A home carved from the wilderness, now threatened by the very people she sought to protect. The horses stamped in agitation, sensing the rising tension, echoing the tremors of a community on edge. The sun dipped further, the fiery orb now a mere sliver on the edge of the world, casting ominous shadows that draped the land like a funeral shroud. Was it truly her responsibility to shield them from judgment? Or would her kindness only invite more cruelty? As the ranchers' voices rose, blending into one cacophony of doubt and fear, Annie felt herself teetering on the brink. The very foundation of her resolve, once so steady, began to crumble beneath the weight of their scrutiny. What would happen when darkness fell and the truth of their fears settled into the night like an unwelcome guest? Annie's heart raced, the pulse of uncertainty thrumming louder than the cicada's song. Would she lose them all, not to the wilderness, but to the very people she had hoped to find solace with? The horizon darkened, swallowing the last vestiges of light, leaving her with a choice that felt far heavier than the dusk pressing in around her. As the sun sank behind the jagged peaks of the Sierra Nevada, casting long shadows that danced against the barren earth, the air hung heavy with tension. The widow rancher, Clara, stood outside her small, creaking cabin, her gaze fixed on the horizon as a cloud of dust approached. It stirred uneasily in the dry wind, scarcely more than a whisper on the vast, parched landscape. The 6 orphans she had taken under her wing came bursting out of the door, their faces smeared with dirt and hope, blurring the lines of their grief. "Who's coming, Clara?" Samuel, the eldest of the orphans, asked, his brow furrowed as he peered into the fading light. She felt the weight of their eyes on her, searching for reassurance. Clara's heart pounded in her chest like a war drum, echoing the fear and uncertainty that had nestled in her bones since the death of her husband. "I don't know, but we should prepare," she replied, her voice steady. The dust settled, revealing a lone rider, his dark silhouette cut against the brilliant orange of the setting sun. As he approached, a rancid scent, reminiscent of burnt offerings from a Viking shipwreck, drifted into the air. What could it be but smoke from a distant fire? Or worse, the remnants of lives lost to greed and hunger. The children clutched each other's hands tighter, their fear palpable. Clara inhaled deeply, steeling herself against the swell of anxiety that threatened to consume her. "We can't let fear dictate our choices," she cautioned them, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the approaching figure. Was it an ally or a threat? And could they afford to take the risk? With each beat of her heart, the rider drew closer until finally, he came into view. A stranger, tall, gaunt, with a face weathered by years, lived under the unforgiving sun. His eyes, however, held an unsettling clarity, as though he could see into the depths of their souls. The children shifted behind Clara, instinctively seeking safety in her presence. Even in the face of adversity, can we trust those who come to our door? She pondered, knowing the answer was a precarious balance between hope and caution. As the stranger reined in his horse, dust swirling around him like a shroud, Clara felt a shift in the air, thickening with the weight of unsaid words. The trust that had built between her and the orphans now hung precariously. threatened by the arrival of this unknown figure. Would they face their fears together, or would mistrust shatter the fragile bonds forged in their shared loss? The horizon darkened as an uneasy silence fell, leaving an unsettling question lingering in the air like the acrid smoke of a distant pyre. What happens when loyalty is tested against the unpredictable tides of fate? The sun loomed high and relentless, a blazing king surveying his barren realm. Dust danced through the air like restless spirits, swirling and shimmering in the heat, while the once fertile fields stood cracked and parched beneath the oppressive sky. It had been weeks since the last rain fell, and the land had begun to whisper its surrender. A low groan that echoed in the hearts of those who called it home. Lena, the widow rancher, stood at the edge of the dry creek bed, her hands on her hips, knuckles white against the sun-baked skin. She squinted into the distance, searching for signs of life. The shimmer of water that felt more like a ghost than a promise. How long could they endure this cruel drought? Each day burned away what little hope remained, and each night brought an unsettling silence that settled over the ranch like a dark, heavy cloak. Behind her, the 6 orphans, now more than mere remnants from tragedy, were a ragtag band of resilience. Clara, the eldest at only 12, wielded a pitchfork with surprising strength, while the others flitted between tasks, a flurry of determination. Matthew, the youngest at 7, still believed in the magic of rain, his small hands cupping the sky in hopeful prayer. Each child, with dirt-streaked faces and calloused hands, shared the weight of the world on their shoulders, forging a bond thicker than blood in the face of adversity. As they toiled together, Lena felt a flicker of gratitude through her despair. These children were her strength, an unexpected family formed from the ashes of loss. She watched as Clara instructed the boys to gather what little hay remained, her voice firm yet gentle, echoing the authority of a Viking chieftain rallying her crew before a storm. If only they could summon the spirit of their ancestors. Perhaps they could turn the tide. Can we save the ranch? Clara's voice broke through Lena's reverie, her blue eyes glistening with determination. It was a question that hung in the air like a blade poised to strike. Lena wanted to promise her that everything would be all right, but the truth stood like an ominous figure in the distance, watching with cruel indifference. The fight for survival was etched into their tired faces, yet hope flickered stubbornly among them. The weight of the sky bore down, but the children worked with fervor, sweat mixing with dust, their laughter a fragile defiance against the encroaching silence of despair. But as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the parched earth, Lena had to wonder. Could mere willpower be enough to save them? Would they find salvation in unity? Or would the drought claim them all? The wind whispered a cruel secret, and deep down she knew that darkness would soon gather, threatening to snuff out their fragile light. As the sun dipped low over the arid landscape, painting the horizon in hues of burnt orange and violet, the widow stood at the edge of her land. The dry earth, cracked and unforgiving, bore witness to the years of toil and heartache she had endured. Wind whipped through her hair, carrying with it the scent of impending rain, a promise that had become an illusion in this part of the world. She inhaled deeply, her chest rising and falling as she braced herself against the gnawing anxiety that clawed at her insides. But today was different. Today, the unease manifested in the form of a figure emerging from the shadows of the dusk. A man on horseback, rugged and familiar, rode toward her like the specters of the past she thought she had buried. His silhouette danced against the fading light, a dark cloud looming over the fragile peace she had struggled to cultivate. As he drew closer, recognition flickered in her chest like the dying embers of a long-forgotten fire. What could he possibly want? She thought, her heart pounding like a war drum. Memories of laughter shared and promises broken surged through her mind, overwhelming and suffocating. Was it mere coincidence that he appeared now after all these years? Or was it fate weaving its cruel tapestry once more? The man dismounted, dust swirling around his boots as he approached. His face was etched with lines that spoke of hardship and regret, much like her own. But beneath those familiar features lay the weight of unspoken words and unresolved tension. Would he dare to speak of the past that had haunted them both? Did he even understand the wounds he had left? "Catherine," he said, his voice low, as if testing the silence that enveloped them. "It's been a long time." The chill of his words seeped into her bones, igniting a spark of anger she had long suppressed. How dare he return after all these years? Hadn't she suffered enough? But as she stood there, rooted to the spot like a willow bending to the wind, the deeper question churned within her. Could she confront the man who had once been her anchor in a storm, only to become the very tempest that tore her world apart? "Why now?" she whispered, barely audible above the rustling leaves. His gaze fell to the ground, shame mingling with the dust at their feet as the silence stretched between them like a taut bowstring, ready to snap. "I didn't come to cause more pain," he replied, but the tremor in his voice betrayed the uncertainty that lingered beneath the surface. And as the shadows lengthened, with the remnants of daylight fading into the encroaching night, Catherine felt the weight of her grief settle around her like a shroud. Would she have the courage to face her past, or would she allow it to shatter the new life she had fought so hard to build? The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the parched earth as the widow rancher Clara stood at the edge of her property. The horizon shimmered like a mirage, blurring the line between reality and desperation. 6 orphaned children huddled close, faces smeared with dirt and fear, their wide eyes reflecting the terror of the unknown. Each heartbeat felt like a drum roll, echoing the fate that awaited them all. Clara's heart raced, her thoughts tangled like the wild sagebrush that skirted the ranch. She could see the dust clouds rising in the distance, an ominous sign of riders approaching, their intentions masked by the fading light. What choice did she have? The law had turned its back long ago, leaving her to fend for herself against the harsh realities of the Old West. In her heart, she knew mercy was a risk, but could she bear the weight of cruelty? The sound of children's restless whispers pricked her resolve, urging her to act. With trembling hands, Clara brushed the hair from her face, her fingers catching on the frayed edges of her worn shawl. She had spent the last few months patching up a life that felt torn asunder, much like the sails of a Viking ship caught in a storm. But this was different. This was not a battle against nature or the harsh winter winds. It was a fight for survival against men who knew no honor. The riders were close now, their silhouettes emerging against the fiery sky, horses snorting and stamping. Clara could feel the heat of impending confrontation, a sense of inevitability creeping into her bones. Would she stand and fight, risking everything? Or would she seek shelter for the children, hiding them away from the wrath that approached? The wind picked up, swirling dust around her, the scent of sage and imminent danger mixing in the air. Clara's gaze fell upon the weathered barn, a sanctuary that had seen both joy and heartache. Behind its sturdy doors lay the means to defend herself. The old rifle, a relic from the man she had loved. But would raising it against those who threatened her mean she had become like them? A harbinger of violence? As the first rider broke free from the pack, the sun glinted off his rifle, a reminder of the choices that lay before her. Would she allow fear to guide her? Or would she embrace the unthinkable to protect the innocent? Silence stretched thin, suffocating as Clara's heart raced. The children clung to her like vines, and with each second that passed, she felt the weight of their lives pressing down upon her. In this moment, what would she sacrifice to shield them from the storm? The tension hung in the air as the rider drew nearer, the soft thud of hooves echoing in the silence. Clara inhaled deeply, her pulse quickening, knowing she stood at the precipice of a decision that could forever change the course of their lives. Would she choose mercy, or was there a darker path ahead? The sun hung low in the dusky sky, casting a blood-orange hue over the desolate landscape of the Arizona desert. Dust swirled in lazy eddies, a reminder of the countless souls who had traversed this unforgiving terrain. At the edge of a crumbling ranch, a figure stood, silhouetted against the fading light. A widow, her face etched with lines of grief and determination, her rifle cradled in her arms like a lifeline. Mabel's heart raced as she watched the cloud of riders approaching, a dark mass cutting through the golden dust like a vengeful storm. 6 months had passed since she stumbled upon 6 orphaned children, their eyes wide with fear and hunger, their spirits as parched as the earth beneath her feet. She had taken them in, nurtured them, and offered them what little warmth her broken heart could muster. In return, they had brought life back to the silent corners of her home. But now, as the riders drew closer, the fragile peace they shared felt like a mere whisper against the roar of impending conflict. What would it take to protect them? Was there honor in fighting when the odds were stacked against her? The riders were known men, outlaws whose names dripped with infamy. Each had their scars. Each bore the weight of choices made in the name of survival. Mabel had learned to navigate the delicate balance between mercy and vengeance. But the stakes had never been higher. A raven called from the skeletal branches of a nearby mesquite tree, a sound that echoed the turmoil in her chest. She remembered the old Viking lore her father once recited by firelight. A man's worth is measured not by how he gathers gold, but by how he protects those he loves. Would she prove worthy today? As the riders closed in, tension crackled in the air, merging with the scent of gunpowder and sweat. Mabel lowered her rifle slightly, a silent gesture to the children huddled behind her. They were scared, their breaths shallow, eyes glistening with unspoken questions. Would she stand her ground? Would she allow her fear to betray her? The leader of the outlaws, a man named Frank, reined in his horse, nostrils flaring like a wounded beast. With a steely glare, he regarded Mabel, the widow who stood defiantly against the gathering storm. You think you can protect them? This is the law of the land, and mercy ain't valued out here. Her heart pounded rhythmically in her chest, mirroring the pulse of the earth beneath her boots. Would mercy be her downfall, or could it forge an unexpected path to salvation? The wind shifted, carrying the weight of fate. But beneath it all lingered a question that would haunt her in the quiet hours. What price must be paid for love in a land where only the strong survived? The moment hung suspended, a breath drawn in the vastness of uncertainty as the dust settled around them, thick and heavy with unfulfilled promises. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden light over the remnants of the devastated ranch. Dust danced like spirits in the fading warmth, swirling around the bodies and broken wood that had once been a home. A lone horse stood beneath a gnarled oak, its head lowered, nostrils flared as if inhaling the lingering scents of smoke and blood. From a distance, the silhouette of the widow, Clara, emerged, her face etched with the deep lines of grief and resolve. The withered landscape mirrored her heart, barren yet resilient. As she trudged forward, the weight of sorrow settled in her chest like a stone. Each step stirred memories of laughter shared with her late husband, of meals cooked over crackling fires, and of dreams whispered under a blanket of stars. But all that lay in ruins now, shattered by fierce winds of conflict that had swept through her life like a Viking longship, crashing upon the shores of a peaceful village. What did it matter, she wondered, to have weathered the storms of the past only to be met with destruction again? The 6 children she had taken in after the massacre stood nearby, their eyes wide and hollow, void of the innocence that had once danced within. Clara watched them, the fragile connections forged in the fires of adversity knitting them closer together, yet the shadow of loss still loomed large. They had fought side by side, united against an unseen enemy, and now they faced the sobering reality that survival came at a price. Would they ever truly heal from this? Could they reclaim the joy that had been stolen from them? Gathering her thoughts, Clara beckoned the children to her side, their small bodies trembling in unison as they approached. She knelt before them, her hands rough yet gentle as they cupped their faces. "We have each other," she murmured, the words heavy with unspoken promise. "And that's something not even the dead can take away. We'll rebuild." The children nodded, though their expressions were uncertain. They had witnessed horrors that could not be unseen. The air hung thick with the fragrance of crushed wild sage and regret, a bittersweet reminder of both the land's beauty and its cruelty. Clara felt their fragility, the delicate fabric of hope interwoven with grief. As she brushed a tear from her cheek, a question lingered in the silence. Would they find the strength to rise from these ashes, or would the weight of their sorrow bury them deeper into the dust? The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for something lost, leaving only the hollow echo of memories behind. Would bonds forged in blood be enough to carry them through the night? The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the barren stretch of land that had once belonged to Margaret Wells. The widow stood on her porch, hands resting on the wooden rail, eyes scanning the horizon that seemed to stretch endlessly into the distance. Dust swirled in the air, catching the golden light and creating a haze that felt almost ethereal. But today, there was a different feeling hanging in the air, a tangible sense of hope. The 6 orphans, once little more than ghosts of their own grief, now thrived under Margaret's watchful eye. They scattered about the land, their laughter breaking the silence like the tolling of a Viking horn, echoing across the fields. They were planting seeds, literal and metaphorical, into the hard, unforgiving soil. Each furrow they dug was a promise of what could be, and as they worked, their hands became calloused, but their spirits began to mend. Would they overcome the weight of their pasts, or would it forever anchor them to despair? Margaret watched as Sarah, the eldest, guided the younger children with a gentle authority that spoke of newfound maturity. How had the girl transformed so quickly from a scared child into a steadfast leader? With each seed they planted, they whispered stories of their lost families, framing the future with the memories of those who had loved them. The wind carried their words as it whispered through the tall grasses, as ancient as the tales of Norsemen who had once traversed these lands, seeking honor and legacy. Off to the side, Thomas, the youngest of the orphans, clutched a wooden toy carved from a piece of scrap wood. It was a simple horse, but in his imagination, it galloped through endless meadows, its mane flowing like a flag in the wind. As he watched his siblings, a smile broke through his solemn demeanor, lighting up his small face. Was it possible that hope could bloom like wildflowers in the cracks of a parched earth? The air was thick with the promise of rain, a rarity in these parts. Margaret could feel it deep within her bones, the shifting pressure that hinted at better days ahead. She turned her gaze back to the children, each one a piece of her heart, scattered yet bound together by the tragedy that had brought them to this moment of fragile unity. As the sun dipped lower, casting a warm glow over their tiny homestead, Margaret knew the storms of life would not cease. They had faced death and loss, but now they stood on the brink of something new, a family forged by hardship. Could they truly rebuild from these ashes? Or would the weight of sorrow drag them back into darkness? As dusk blanketed the ranch, shadows stretched across the parched earth, a testament to both the harshness of the land and the resilience of its inhabitants. The wind whispered secrets through the tall grasses, rustling like a forgotten song, a hymn of both sorrow and survival. Here, the widow rancher stood, silhouetted against the fading embers of the sun, her hands calloused from years of toil, cradling the 6 orphans she had taken in, her unexpected companions, her newfound family. A lone raven circled overhead, its caw echoing through the quiet expanse, as if it sensed the weight of their burdens and the unsaid promises that lingered in the cool evening air. How many lives had been shaped by the land, and how many dreams had been buried beneath its unforgiving surface. The horizon stretched before them, a vast canvas painted with their hopes and fears, the scars of their pasts etched deep into the soil. The children played nearby, their laughter a fleeting melody that danced on the wind, juxtaposed against the looming threat of the darkness that would soon engulf them. Each child, each one a reminder of loss, yet also a beacon of hope, chased after shadows that flickered in the twilight, unaware of the ghosts that haunted the land. The remnants of an ancient Viking ship sat half-buried in the nearby creek, a relic from a bygone era, whispering stories of conquest and exploration, evoking thoughts of journeys long taken, and the unyielding spirit of those who dared to sail into the unknown. As the widow turned her gaze toward the horizon, she felt the weight of countless generations pressing upon her. The land was alive, a living testament to resilience, suffering, and rebirth. It held their stories, their secrets, and it demanded respect. What legacy would she leave behind? She pondered, knowing that the dust beneath her feet cradled the memories of those who had come before her, shaping not only the earth but the very essence of the lives they had led. The sun dipped below the horizon, and a chill swept through the air, reminding her that while the warmth of the day faded, the promise of tomorrow lingered just beyond the edge of darkness. In that moment, she knew that survival was intertwined with the land. It was the very marrow of their existence, the soil from which they had all been nourished. As she watched the children dance in the gloaming light, the widow's heart swelled with an overwhelming sense of purpose. But in the silence that followed, an unsettling question remained, echoing like a distant thunder. Could anyone truly escape the shadows of their past? Or were they destined to become entwined with the land they called home? And as the stars began to pierce the darkening sky, she felt the earth beneath her feet pulse with life, leaving her to wonder what would become of them all as the night unfurled its velvet mantle. Would they forge a new path, or would they remain forever bound to the legacies of sorrow and strength that the land demanded?